Bonjour, friends. My goodness. We're well into January, and leave it to my mother to remind me that I left the US. If you can imagine, I left the US a quarter of a century ago. And I like to say a quarter of a century ago because I feel like that sounds much better than 25 years. But my heavens, I've been gone for 25 years. And I just really paused about that over this past week to think about all the things that have changed and all the things that have somehow remained the same. I mean, 25 years ago, my family walked me up to the gate where the airplane was. Well, that certainly doesn't happen anymore. And some important people in my family were there to bid me adieu and wish me luck. And all the while, my grandmother was pretty old at that point, still mobile, but we had her in a wheelchair. Every inch through Chicago O'Hare Airport, she kept asking me, can't I find a job closer to home? Wow. I'd love for her to be here to ask me the same thing today. Anyhow, out of those 25 years, I've spent 20 living in France. And I don't know how on earth that happened, but it did. I actually went through my phone to try to get some photos of those years. And then I thought, oh my gosh, well, there was no iPhone. There wasn't even Instagram, so there was nothing to post it to. I think there was Facebook, but I struggled to find memories. Of course, I have physical photos, but I didn't have anything in my phone. I did find one, and it struck me that picture could have been taken 100 years ago here in Paris, because very little changes, or it could have been taken 50 years from now. But so much has changed if we think about what's happened in those past 20 years. And since I've been in France for 20 years, it made me think I wanted to share some of the lessons I've learned. I do have a different skew because a lot of it has been business related. I came here because I was working in a bank. I changed and I decided to become an entrepreneur. So I am very skewed on my view of how things operate, I will say, because a lot of it's been in a business context, and that just certainly has different pressures and concerns. But there are some fundamental messages. So I wanted to share those with you today. Welcome to Generate Her. I'm Jane Bertch. I spent the first half of my life working in a corporate organization, and then I decided to trade that all in to become an entrepreneur. Yes, here in your favorite city of Paris, France. And today, I hope I'm a guide on your journey to personal reinvention and transformation. The first one, relationships. Relationships in France are long-term investments. They don't come overnight. And I've actually come to love and appreciate that. I can tell you, when you first move to a country, trying to make friends is really hard. And there's a loneliness. And in Paris, I found that was exponential in terms of pain. Trying to meet local friends here was very hard. But I understand it now. And if there's one thing you may want to read to understand the culture, I always recommend the book Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince. I think this is such a great example of how culturally things just operate very different here. So to summarize a bit, and I hope you read it for yourself, this little boy meets a fox, and basically goes to the fox and he says, let's be friends. Now, in my North American fairy tale, 2 seconds later, they're off playing and having play dates and barbecues and all that stuff. That does not happen here. What happens is the fox says, basically, how can we be friends? We don't know each other. You have to tame me. I'll leave you to discover the rest, but that really made me understand relationships here and how they operate. And they do take time. But once you have them, they are so solid. They are so sustaining. they're such an important part of my life here in France now. Not without doing my time, though. Something else I've learned is here in France, we revere expertise. We revere experts. That's why, by the way, a liberal arts degree like I have just confuses people, but that's fine. I'll talk about later using your differences to your benefit, but expertise is so important here. And it's revered. Not necessarily the customer or the client, but the expert is who's revered. So how does that play out? I think that plays out in a pride that we see. When you walk into a boutique in Paris, we're also talking about a place where it wasn't too long ago, you had to knock on a door or ring a doorbell to ask for entry to a boutique. And you certainly wouldn't touch things. You'd ask to be shown them. So we have the pleasure of shopping at their establishment or buying their product or tasting their goods because they're an expert. And I love that. And that makes me think about when I do business, how I approach people and the importance of having confidence, but humility. That is a combination I've really come to learn and appreciate here in France. And I'll talk about that in a bit. So this leads me to contracts. You know, when you're doing business, contracts are important. These are engagements. But one thing I've really come to understand is that contracts are based on relationships. They're not based on money. So when I talk about engagements, me doing business with someone is based on their perception of me and my reputation. So the engagement we have is together, and we just happen to exchange a product through it. That's a very, very, very different approach from my experience in North America, where I could approach a stranger. I could approach a stranger and start to talk about the potential of some project together, all the money we're going to make. That will not fly here. I won't even get through the door to be able to have a discussion. What's most important is the relationship I have with that person. And again, going back to how relationships are so intertwined in business, I have a better chance to have a relationship with a new business partner if I've been introduced by a mutual business partner. So things take time. They really, really take a lot of time and patience, which is hard. So let's talk about time. The first response that I'm used to getting is no. And that used to scare me off. And then I realized, well, I'm not going to get very far because I joke about it. And some people may agree with me, but no seems to be the start of a discussion here. And I'm ready for it now. And I consider no to be, I like to call it a curtsy in a very intricate dance and in a very long, slow dance, i.e., negotiation. But in that negotiation, I always know that the person in front of me, I need them more than they need me. That may not be the case, by the way. That may not be the case in how things actually play out. But I keep that spirit in mind with how I'm addressing them, which allows me to have confidence, but still have humility. Again, confidence and humility, I think, are two key words when it comes to doing business in France. Another thing I've learned is about presentation. Presentation is everything. It really is everything. And you can see this play out in so many different ways. People often comment on how well-dressed the French are, which is changing, by the way. There used to be a time when people didn't wear gym shoes. Well, now they do. And now they may come out with messy hair versus being fully coiffed, as we say. But personal presentation is something that's really struck me. And struck me in a really thoughtful way. It's not the exterior aesthetics, it's also, again, the confidence. The how I see some of my French friends enter a room with their heads held high. It's how I see them address people, again, with confidence, but not conceit. Confidence with humility. It's how I see they carry themselves. It's how I see they set their table when they're having friends over. Or frankly, set their table for themselves. If it's dinner of one, to make a beautiful place setting, to take time to put the cream from its plastic horrible container, which I would just probably plop on the table. I don't do that now. I take time to put it in a beautiful bowl. Because presentation is everything. And that's why when you walk into a boutique and you see the window display, try to disturb that window display and see what happens. You're going to be really disappointed. I've been there. So I love that. I love the thoughts around presentation in so many senses of the word. And if I loop back to relationships, again, because that's really an undercurrent through France, relationships. Presentation is crucial. I mentioned earlier that I'm more likely to have the chance to develop a business relationship with a new business if I'm introduced by a mutual contact. When I first started out working here in Paris, I was working for a bank. And it was such an interesting juxtaposition because this is not the first time I had started a new assignment somewhere. It happened to be that this one was in Paris. But I have joined other teams through my professional corporate career in many occasions. And when that happened, the mass email would go out to the team introducing, welcoming Jane. If you see her in the hallway, say hello. And at the next team meet, we can all meet her. Which is fine. That worked perfectly well. In Paris, my new boss, took me around to every single colleague and introduced me. And not just this is Jane. He told them a bit about me, why I was here, how we would be working together. And to me, that was a very important anchor in my ability to do business with them going forward. So when a French person introduces you to somebody, they're likely to say, Je vous présente. I'm going to present you, Jane. And I think about that every day in my relationships here and the ones that I've had the honor of them growing and flourishing. It's because somebody took time to present me. But they wouldn't have done so if they didn't have confidence. And they won't have confidence if we don't have a relationship. And that relationship is only through time and trust. One thing I've also learned in my time here is respect for personal privacy. And I think I've really adopted this, I must say, because I realized working here, and every office is different, so this is not a broad brush stroke across France, but I have seen a real respect for personal privacy versus your outward image. I think this is the only country in the world that can have, not the only, but I'm comparing to the US, can have a president that's not married. I don't know if the US could do that. And then to have a president where in the news, he's on his scooter going to visit his girlfriend in the middle of the night. Now, I just imagine how would my US colleagues respond? We'd be up in arms. We'd be all in the business. We'd need to understand every bit of it. Here, it came and went like a flash in a pan because most people said, That's not our business. That's his private life. And we shall not enter into that. So how does that play out? How does that play out when I'm engaging with people? I'm very respectful of our distance. Vous and tu are two different relationships. It's softening a bit in France. Things are changing. People are getting less formal, but I'm still very cautious to make sure I understand where I am. And it's almost like a boyfriend-girlfriend or girlfriend-girlfriend or boyfriend-boyfriend relationship where you want to have the talk about what you are to each other. I feel like that happens with how do you address people. And still yet today. It's funny, over the holidays, I was with some friends and their parents were there, French parents. And I'm speaking to them and I'll say vous no matter what, because if I can just make my darn sentence, that's all that matters. Okay, so I'm trying to get the conjugations. I'm not going to worry with that. So she said, you can tutoyer me. And that wasn't just a, how do you address me? It was a, you're close because you're here as a part of our family activity, and we have an intimacy. And I felt very special about that. And even if she hadn't have said that, because she's older, vous is certainly a form of respect. But if that gives you a sense of the importance of privacy and intimacy, also how that plays out is I leave people to tell me what they want to tell me. And they will when they're ready and in their time. I don't ask probing questions. And probing questions are you married? How many kids do you have? Where do you live? I have realized that can be invasive to people. So I leave it to their time and in their time to decide what they want to share with me. And that's also a mark of intimacy that I can see. The more they share with me about their private lives, the closer I realize we are. So those, I think, are important benchmarks that are not to be rushed. And they're very helpful. They're very helpful in helping you to understand your relationship with people. So I think personal privacy is paramount. By the way, if you get invited to a French person's home, don't show up on time. It's called the 15 minutes de politesse, the 15 minutes of politeness. Actually, I call it the 15 minutes of politeness, but it is, there is a point of not arriving on time. And please, please, please don't ask to visit their home. They'll show you what they want you to see. And seeing what are their intimate spaces is not really done. It is rather embarrassing to people, by the way. And I guess one of the last things I've learned, I've talked a lot about confidence and humility. And that's very important to me. And I think about, and the last thing I want to talk about is this golden braid that I've addressed of confidence and humility. The French, and I sometimes don't like when I say the French. Again, this is not a broad brush stroke across France. This is my experience with the people I know. Being showy and bling bling, you may have seen that term, is vulgar to people. It's really vulgar to the people I know. So I always try to have a careful balance. I think about this in my life. I think about this as my business. To share, not to show. To share, because showing can become showing off. And I don't ever want to be accused of that. I want people to feel invited in to some of the things that I get exposed to. Not that I'm showing them off. I would hate for somebody to look at what I'm doing or what I'm sharing and it not make them feel better about themselves or feel like they've learned something or they were included in something special. I don't ever want somebody to look at what I'm doing and feeling awful about themselves for it. And I think this is something I picked up in France. So again, there's an art of elegance, confidence, humility that I think are really important combinations. And coming back to me, lastly, in business, I really do think these have made me a more thoughtful business person in the environment that I'm operating in. And I appreciate and am respectful that there's different codes elsewhere. If I were doing business in Mexico, it might be different. If I'm doing business in the US, it might be different. But I do feel like some of these traits are things we can generally think about and learn from. France is certainly not perfect. Paris is certainly not perfect. It's got its blemishes, and I recognize them. But I also recognize some of the wonderful things I've learned living here those past 20 years. So friends, thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it gives you some food for thought. I'd love to hear what your comments are. I'd love to hear what you've learned. So until next time, keep shining. You know that I do love journaling, and I did take time to journal about all the things that I've learned these past 20 years here. If you love to journal, I do have journal prompts on my website, 30 days of prompts. You can find them at janebertch.com/journal. And if you enjoyed this episode, please rate it. Please share it with a friend. Maybe it will provoke some new thoughts for them. Okay, mes amis. See you next time.